We have a surprising Rockets trade incoming as a writer has revealed a crucial update for the Houston Rockets draft plan as they look to trade their number 10 overall pick to move back in the draft and pick up even more future first-round picks. Welcome into Rockets Digest. I'm Jace Andrews. We appreciate you joining us. If you have not already, please hit that subscribe button. It's the easiest way to support this channel. It's free, and we're on the road to 1,800. I'd certainly appreciate it if you join the channel now before we go absolutely haywire once the season starts. Now, let's talk about this new NBA mock trade in which the Rockets would move back in the NBA draft, and they would acquire a pick in this year's draft still. In fact, they wouldn't move back that far. And on top of it, they would also acquire a future first-round pick, which, if you've heard and watched this channel for long enough, or if you know my opinion on it, the Rockets do not need to use that number 10 pick. Their team is too good for them to, I'm not going to call it a waste, because if you get a number 10 overall pick, it's never going to be a waste. However, they could do so much more by trading that number 10 overall pick rather than holding on to it. Now, this trade I like for a couple of different reasons. It's also kind of an interesting concept, so I'm going to talk about it. I want you to have your opinions ready for it in the comments, but let's first talk about this draft order because it's something that I'm not going to say sparked a fire in some way, but it was definitely not the greatest of results, as the Dallas Mavericks, who had a, I believe, 1.8% chance to get the number 1 overall pick, did acquire that after trading Luka Doncic. I'm not going to say there was collusion or anything, but I'll just leave that there. The Houston Rockets did end up with the number 10 overall pick, which stinks because they had a pretty decent percentage to get the first, second, third, or fourth overall pick. They did not. In fact, they had a higher percentage to get the 9th overall pick, and while moving up one slot does not matter too much, every slot matters, especially when you're trying to trade that pick, and especially when it seems like it's going to be a draft night trade. Now, unfortunately, that's not what happened, and that's okay, and that's exactly why they should trade away this pick, because there was still a lot of value in the number 10 pick, and I don't think the Rockets are going to be the best place for them to use that value in picking a player, but rather going out and making a trade. So I've made y'all wait long enough. Let's look at this trade details and let me know what you think about it in the comments section. The Orlando Magic will get the number 10 overall pick, and the Houston Rockets would get the Magic's 2026 first-round pick and this year's number 16. Now, kind of a quick, just throw this out there. The Orlando Magic were hurt for a lot of this year, and yet they still made it into the playoffs where they lost to the Boston Celtics in technically the first playoff round. So, that first-round pick is somewhat of an interesting case because there's a lot of situations where the Magic could continue to be injured and they maybe don't draft that number 10 pick well, and they're probably around the same slot next year, number 15, 16, maybe a little lower, but probably around that same middle ground area. On the other hand, they could really have a good season, and who knows, maybe their Eastern Conference, it's so weak, and obviously they could easily go in there and, I'm not going to say Eastern Conference Finals, but make it to the second round and push that draft pick back a couple of slots. So in that case, it's an interesting thing for the Houston Rockets. Now, I do want to point out something because in this mock trade, there was a guy who fell to number 10, and I think you're going to take interest in this guy, as it is none other than Duke's Kon Knueppel, and he says, quote, or this is Derek Parker of Rockets SI who said this about Knueppel, saying, quote, "One of those is Duke's Kon Knueppel, who seems to have a wide range due to his high feel but potentially low ceiling game. His sharpshooting is sure to be coveted by many NBA teams, but there's certainly higher swings to be made in the top 5 to 7 picks," end quote. And I've seen your comments. There is a lot of you that would love to have Kon Knueppel here on the Houston Rockets. And while I do think he is a good fit for Houston for a couple of different reasons, I find it interesting what Derek Parker wrote, and that's why I want to kind of continue on in this report before we get too ahead of ourselves. Before we get too much into why I think this is an interesting, maybe close decision for the Rockets, would you take this trade? I'll show you the trade here in just a minute, but I don't want to get too far into the reasoning behind it before I want your opinions. I don't want to sway your opinions before I'm able to let you go down in the comment section. So would you take this trade? If you want to look at it one more time, here is it. The Orlando Magic at the number 10 pick, and the Houston Rockets gets the Magic's 2026 first-round pick and number 16 this year. So they move back 6 slots and get a first-round pick added on to their sheet for next year, or potentially used for a different trade. Who knows at this point? Let me know in the comments, would you do that trade? And this is where Derek Parker, I think, the writer for Rockets SI, takes a turn that I don't agree with. And I want you to look at this real quick because he compares him to somebody interesting, saying, quote, "While Houston would have use for Knueppel's shooting and passing too, there's certainly some overlap with Rockets guard Shepard, who will reportedly have a much larger role next season, and the Rockets still grab a much-needed piece at number 16, too, end quote. There's so much to break down in this. I've got to have a couple of different thoughts to kind of break down. The first one being Kon Knueppel and Reed Shepard. I get what he's saying in terms of how they are comparable. Knueppel is a sharpshooter. Reed Shepard is labeled as a sharpshooter. However, they are very, very different. In fact, Knueppel is 6'7" and can play the small forward position, whereas Reed Shepard is 6'2" and is more of a point/shooting guard. They don't really overlap too much. I understand what he's trying to get at in terms of the shooting ability, and it is there for both parties, but if the reasoning for not taking Knueppel is because they think that Reed Shepard will play that role, I don't know if that's the right reasoning. I'm not saying it's wrong to pass on Knueppel at all. I just don't think it's the right reasoning to say, oh, well, we have Reed Shepard, which is basically Kon Knueppel. No, not at all. In fact, their games are relatively different for a lot of different reasons. They just have the comparability of being a sharpshooter, and in a lot of ways, they both have low ceilings. The difference is Reed Shepard is already on your roster, and you're getting calls for Reed Shepard, yes, but you're getting more calls for that number 10 pick. So in this case scenario, I don't really like the comparison there in a lot of ways. And especially when the second part of that is Reed Shepard is supposedly going to get more minutes in this upcoming season. And for a guy out of Kentucky who was a very, very high draft lottery pick, it is a person of note to see that maybe he's going to be playing more often next season and could kind of give us a hint as to what the Rockets feel about potential trade calls for him. Now, this guy's not even 21 years old yet, which is crazy to think about. But his points per game, his rebounds per game, his assists per game, yes, they're all pretty low, but it's also because his minutes per game were also very low. Again, you see that height, 6'2". Knueppel is 6'7". So, yes, the comparison is there with the sharp shooting ability and the low ceiling, but they are not the same player for many different reasons. And it's kind of hard when you get to these NBA draft picks because in a lot of ways, the person that you see in the college level basketball is not going to be the same guy that you see in the NBA level basketball. And it's hard because when you look at NBA and college, you look at those top draft picks who do translate into the quote-unquote same players. I think Donovan Mitchell translated into the same player he was in college. Steph Curry translated into the same player he was in college. But at the same time, there's other differences where they kind of come out and have a different thing. So kind of a niche thing here, but Cole Anthony was a very different player at UNC than he is now on the Orlando Magic. So I don't like to make these, oh, well, he can be this in the NBA past the 5th overall pick, 6th overall pick. So anyways, that's kind of my opinion. I'm sure you're wondering who the Rockets did take at number 16 with this draft pick. Wrong one there. Here it is. Quote, in the mock, Houston left with St. Joe's forward Rashier Fleming at number 16. Now, Fleming averaged 14.7 points, 8.5 rebounds, 1.4 steals, and 1.5 blocks per game while shooting 39% from beyond the arc. Fleming feels like the perfect pairing for star center Alperen Şengün in the front court. And to kind of go on a little tangent about this, Fleming does fit well because you're trying to look for that Alperen Şengün relief. And Steven Adams is great, and I want him to be on this roster, and I think he will. But at the same time, you also have to be wary that he could sign with the Los Angeles Lakers, who are heavily, heavily pursuing him. Now, at the same time, when if you do sign back Steven Adams, you like to play him in that double big lineup. Having a guy like Alperen Şengün, which I believe Fleming is kind of comparable to, would work for a lot of different reasons. The first one being you can sub him in out and give Alperen a little bit more breathers. Plus, not to say that fatigue was a factor this season at all and having to play the Warriors going into 7 games was because they were fatigued from the season, but it's always nice to keep your guys rested. And especially as you become this hopeful dynasty type level team, you're going to be playing not 82 games a year. You're going to be playing upwards to, technically you got to win like 16 games. So you're playing close to 100 games per season. So you want to keep these guys rested because the goal is to continue to play like upwards of 95 games every season. So that's a big thing for the fatigue factor. And it's a lot of different things to kind of look at here. But I just am curious about what other calls the Houston Rockets are getting for this number 10 overall pick. And I think the bigger question behind all of this is the Rockets do not want to use that number 10 pick. Whether they want to move back, whether they use it for a star, is a question. But what about the third option of potentially moving back before the NBA draft, not making a draft day trade, and then using the assets that you acquired from that first trade to then trade for a Kevin Durant, a Giannis, a Ja, a Trey, a whoever. It doesn't really matter if that's the route they're going to take. Now, we know that Rafael Stone has preached and preached he wants this team to be pretty intact from what it was last year to this upcoming season. But there is still a lot to talk about when you look at this roster and wanting to become better. And in my mind, to get better, I think a trade has to be made. But I certainly think that at this point, I feel like I got a good taste for most Rockets fans. My opinion is standing still. They don't need that number 10 pick. I'm curious if you all have the same opinion, and that's where I'm going to leave you today, is let me know in the comment section, what should they do with this number 10 overall pick? Trade it, keep it, whatever you think you would do. I want you to leave it down in the comment section. We're keeping watch of it. We're keeping tabs. And guess what? We're keeping putting out more content. So hit that subscribe button. We got another video coming up for you later today. Little spoiler, if you made it to the end of the video, I'll give you a little heads up. Stephen A. Smith has labeled the Rockets as a top contender. In fact, the top contender for both Giannis and KD. We'll have the updates on that on a later video today. But for now, we appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you next time here on Rockets Digest. Peace out.